Well, welcome. I'm Victoria Cobb, president of the Family Foundation. We are so glad that you are here. Many of you have been a part of a lengthy series of VIP chats we did really throughout the period of time where Virginia was in lockdown and many of us were trapped at home. And we've tried to continue to do a few of these where we felt that there were topics or speakers or things that folks would be interested in. This one has a lot of interest, so we have a lot of folks joining us today. Maybe some of you, this is your first one that you've been a part of, and we're thrilled to have you. Our goal is simply to facilitate information and relationship, that you kind of hear from some of the folks that we get to hear from on a regular basis about the things that matter. You know, we've done everything from some looking at the special session the General Assembly was in, all the way through some Supreme Court discussion when Amy Coney Barrett was being nominated and then confirmed. And then today we obviously find ourselves in this moment where I hope you all are recouping some sleep and just in good sound mind. It is hard in this moment to not obsess over the news or get a little off focus on what really matters. We're a faith-based organization. We obviously believe there are things much more important than simply who is president, because we know who's king. But sometimes who's president matters a lot. We get really wrapped up in this moment where we're counting ballots and we're watching for more ballot drops in certain states and so forth. So we thought we'd bring you some analysis today and just a good discussion about where we are. We knew we wouldn't have all the answers. I actually, when we set this up, we predicted we won't have all the answers. We were hoping we have enough to discuss, and I think we have plenty to discuss today. We're going to do that just for some context of where we are. You know, this changes by the minute, so my info could be outdated at this point. But as you know, we're kind of hanging out waiting for final results in several states. Arizona still dropping a fair number of ballots, and I think folks from Arizona tend to think that Trump's going to pull that state out, but we'll hear some more from people who know. One of our guests today. Pennsylvania, as you know, deeply contested, obviously maybe leaning Biden, as the news would tell you. That's kind of where they think it's going to end up, but we want to see the ballots counted and we want to see a fair election. So we're hoping there's not, Philly sort of has a history of fraud, as you've heard, and so we're hoping that things are upright there. Nevada, we're hanging out waiting. That one seems to be a slow crawl just to count the votes. And of course, North Carolina. So we still have a lot of open questions, and the paths for each candidate, for President Trump to stay president, gets a little bit narrower right now, and the path for Biden maybe a little bit wider, but still a path that he has to win. So we're in this moment, we're watching, we're waiting, and what we thought we'd do is bring to you some experts, some folks that have been in this battle on the pro-family side for a long time, but also bring some unique expertise to this election. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests. I'm going to first introduce George Khalaf, he's been connected to the pro-family movement for quite some time. We've had a relationship with him for data things and other things, I guess we'd say, for quite some time. But he is now the president of Data Orbital, where he is leveraging data experience, political instincts, because he's been on all this, connected to all these events, history and campaigns and whatnot, and his strategic relationships for clients and causes throughout Arizona and a growing number of states. He's passionate about the role of intentional data in advancing causes, policies, and individuals that create thriving communities. Specifically, what you want to know about Data Orbital is that under George's leadership, the firm experienced a successful 2016 cycle with their track polling in the presidential and U.S. Senate coming within less than 1% of the final outcome. There are not many places, as you know from the news, that can actually say they were remotely expecting the outcome that we saw in 2016. And then in 2018, they successfully predicted the 2018 election outcome with 90% accuracy and is rated in the top 15% of all national firms by 538. So we thought, we've got a friend and we've got somebody that's getting this thing right in a moment where a lot of people are getting it wrong. So we wanted to hear from George. And then I also wanted to introduce to you another friend of the Family Foundation, Austin Ruse. Austin and his wife Kathy have been such amazing Virginians, tied to us for a long time. They have been so beneficial in the battle for the family here in Virginia, but also, he's his own rock star on a national level and an international level, really, in the work that they do. So let me tell you a little bit about Austin. He is the president of CFAM, a pro-family group in special consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Conference, where CFAM has been instrumental in blocking a global right to abortion. Austin's published more than 1,000 articles and essays. One that we really enjoyed reading recently, maybe you saw this as well, that was really focused in on President Trump's humor, which is not something that ever gets discussed. You only hear about his tweets, what the media wants you to think about them, but he actually wrote a really insightful article sort of about President Trump's humor. So anyway, he's written all these articles along with 3 books, his latest of which is The Catholic Case for Trump. So welcome, both of you. We're so glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
Well,
thank you.
Why don't we just get right into it? I'm going to start with George because I think the data is maybe a good starting point, and then we'll sort of maybe move over more towards the issues. Before we get into maybe state specifics, which I know everybody's, watching with bated breath, help us understand in general how pollsters and media network tabulation, how they tabulate election results in the first place. And we also know, I guess, campaigns employ their own pollsters. Then you got the networks that use certain polls. Is there a difference in that data that one has versus the other? And how did we all get it so wrong? For a few, like you.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. So
yeah,
bear with me. Let's start with how things are counted. And first off, I want to say thank you, Victoria, for having me on. I've been proud to kind of watch your work and work alongside you from being here in Arizona and all that you're doing in Virginia. So thank you for that. So there is a lot of confusion about how votes are counted, quite frankly. And every state is different. For example, in Arizona, because we've been doing mail-in balloting for 20 years, we have a very specific process on what we do. We count those by mail that arrived the Friday before Election Day first, then Election Day, then those that arrived between Friday and Tuesday, and then those that were dropped off on Election Day. But states, this is the confusing part, states like Pennsylvania and Virginia and others, this is the first cycle that they've really done a robust vote by mail program, and so their counting is all over the place. And what's happening is it's giving people this perception inaccurately that something is, things are changing rapidly, but it's because of the order of the balloting. The bottom line is this: whether or not there has been fraud, and it looks like in some places, in some parts of the country, there definitely very well could be, and there's going to be a lot of litigation, regardless of what is or isn't called today, looking like in favor of Vice President Biden. It's going to be in the court system. We know something has to change. It should not be this difficult. Florida did it in 24 hours. Texas did it in about 24 to 48 hours. We know that there are large states that can count accurately and count it well. It shouldn't be this hard to do it. And I think that's the frustrating thing. Our country is far too divided right now for this much confusion. It's giving people the wrong idea that even if there wasn't fraud, there is the perception of something that's happening, and we cannot afford even that perception of it. So I'll say that on the vote counting part. Very quickly on the polling, there absolutely is a difference. So we had predicted in Arizona, and again, we'll talk about it in a little bit, that President Trump could take the state. It's looking like after the update from this morning, it's going to be tough for President Trump to take it on, but we had our last survey, we had actually Vice President Biden up by 0.6%, and we look to be within 0.1 or 0.2% this year of those results. So surveys like ours are accurate, but the problem is that we have people doing hundreds of surveys around the country, thousands of surveys, and I feel like oftentimes some of the media surveys just want media attention versus actually trying to predict what's happening. And so there's a big difference in survey research. This time around, some surveys got it right, some surveys got it wrong. There's going to be a lot to unpack and debrief. But of course, we did that after 2016, and we still had problems this year. So it's a work in progress from a survey research perspective.
Absolutely. And I appreciate your comment about fraud and just whether it is or isn't when the system works this way, where some states seem to be able to get it done and other states seem to not be able to get it done. It is hard perception-wise for people to really come to grips with, okay, it might not be fraudulent, but it sure feels terrible. It just does not, we had an example here, and some of our folks might be really interested in this. The race we worked the hardest in at the Family Foundation Action, our more political arm, they knocked 82,000 doors in the 7th District of Virginia. 100,000 texts, 130,000 phone calls. So real effort put in there. We knew it was going to be a nail biter. Everything gave us, all indicators said this thing is going to be close. We get to, the end of election night, and our candidate happens to be up about 712 votes. I mean, it was that close. We knew it. And then the next day, the county we knew was going to be the hardest to maintain enough votes in shows up with a USB drive that they say had 15,000 ballots that were mislabeled provisional. And they were actually ballots that needed to be counted. And what do you know? The candidate that, is now considered down by just enough to be out of the recount 1% range. Well, that may all really be what happened, but it sure does not make a Henrico County voter feel confident about their vote that it got lost on a USB drive, if that's really how this race went down. So we are feeling it very intensely, this idea that the election just doesn't feel right, even if it is right. And that's something that we really, as Americans, have got to get to the point where we allow our election laws to function well for us. And that's in every state. Those are state by state in most cases.
And I will add this one thing, and unfortunately, and everyone likes to dunk on the media, but I'll say this about them. They're going to look to demonize no matter what happens. They're going to look to put down this uncomfortableness that a large percentage of the country is feeling, to discredit it and say, well, they're just trying to hold on to President Trump or whatever it may be. But the problem is there are legitimate concerns. And once again, they're out of touch with a large swath of America. And then they are widening the gap, which makes people trust less, which makes them say more. I mean, it is like a cycle.
It is a terrible cycle.
Progressively worse since 2016.
100% right. So maybe let's talk about some of these specific states. I know there are different ways each campaign can claim victory at this point, but let's assume, and this is a tough assumption right now, Georgia looks like it's been leaning, I guess, Biden, and we had some military votes out. I don't know if I've heard if they're in. There was something like 8,000 military votes we could get today, and those were breaking for Trump, but we don't know. And all that to say, okay, so let's say Trump holds, just as a scenario, he holds Georgia somehow, he holds North Carolina. I mean, we think the race a lot comes down to Arizona, and Pennsylvania, because they hold a lot of electoral votes. And we saw Fox News call Arizona early before actually counting any in-person votes. Is that my understanding? They had only counted early voting and said it's done?
Yeah, they announced essentially within an hour after a fraction of our votes were in. It was unbelievable. And I watched the head of the decision desk, and regardless if they end up being right, it was way too close to call at the time, essentially lie on national television and say that there were fewer votes left to be counted than there actually were, and say that President Trump was going to win only 44% of the vote when he has significantly won more. And again, he may not win enough to take the state, but it was an extremely premature call that, again, caused confusion, it's causing concern. And now we have protests outside of our elections department and people with weapons, and it's devolving because people, I believe, intentionally or unintentionally caused unnecessary confusion.
Yes, and the media tends to just, they're all guilty of when they call these states, what the motive is and all of that. And, some of us enjoyed watching Tim Murtaugh get up on Fox News and kind of chew them out for that. That's the president's, one of the president's campaign guys. He's a Virginian. We know him from way back when. So it's fun to watch him battle out the media narrative. Okay, so in Arizona, what was your data showing you leading up to Election Day? What did you think might happen there?
So leading up to Election Day, our last survey showed that Vice President Biden was up by 0.6%. So we knew it was going to be extremely close. We did feel fairly confident that the president would outperform his surveys, and so we had rated it as leans Trump. Now that we've seen other states in the way that it has played out, the president has overperformed dramatically in Midwestern states, but has tended to underperform or meet survey results in places like Georgia and in some of these states that are dominated by suburbs. In Arizona, most people don't know, 61% of our population center is in one county, Maricopa County, our largest county, and it is almost all suburban. It's either urban, suburban, with some exurban areas. When you add in Pima County in southern Arizona, which is very blue, it's 80% of the state. And so we don't have a lot of rural votes like an Ohio does, or even like a Virginia does, or I should say maybe like Virginia, we have a big population mass in a handful of counties and some small blip of the state. We have a similar thing here in Arizona. And so we knew it was going to be close, and it is going to continue to be razor thin. And again, right now we feel like Biden is on pace with the ballots remaining. We could be in recount territory. Our recount percentages are very small here, so it's going to be difficult to get into recount territory, but we could be. But if not, we could see Vice President Biden win by 0.2, 0.3, 0.4%. It is going to be extremely tight.
Now, we kept hearing Trump would have to get, 57% of everything that's out. And your point is the particular area where it's out probably won't yield quite 57%. Is that kind of what you're thinking at this point? But
yes,
we like to be optimistic.
Yeah, up until yesterday when we went to bed, he was right at 57%, if not slightly exceeding it. He was right there. With what happened at literally an hour ago this morning, 11 a.m. Eastern, he was significantly under the 57%. That really is what's caused our projection to change. It wasn't anything that happened yesterday. Yesterday was actually really good for the president. It was very specifically this morning from Maricopa County at 9 a.m.
That makes perfect sense. And this is what we're going to keep seeing kind of as the data just kind of rolls in from these different states. It's these percentages and where it's coming in from that make really all the difference in the world, just in how it ultimately ends up. And that's a challenge. Austin, maybe let's talk a little bit about some of let me ask a few more state specifics, actually. Let me go back to you, George. Tell me a little bit about Pennsylvania, because that's a hot one. We mentioned we were going to talk about that. Tell me, what do we know there? What are we thinking? Did you do any ahead of work there, or is it just kind of looking at other polling? Or
yeah, we've been in Pennsylvania. We were looking at other polling, and obviously we've been tracking the data there, not as closely obviously as Arizona in our home state, because there was a lot to track here, quite frankly. It's looking like Pennsylvania, and really Pennsylvania at this point is arguably more important than Arizona, because if Biden wins Pennsylvania, those 20 put him enough, even if President Trump wins Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, and Nevada, because Biden's at 253, and then he needs a 20 from Pennsylvania, and he'll be at 273. So Pennsylvania is going to be close. This is another big problem with the way that we count ballots. The bulk of the ballots remaining are in Philadelphia area, which obviously we know is going to be heavily for Biden, but there are what we call provisional ballots, things that people weren't able to verify IDs, stuff that will potentially be litigated. Those are from all over the state. Yesterday, for example, the Pittsburgh area, Allegheny County, didn't count any ballots. They decided that they were going to take an administrative day and then count ballots today. Again, I am not saying that it is not difficult to count ballots 24/7, but we are in a very tumultuous time, and we just have to sort of buckle down and get it done. And they took a pause, as did Nevada, for example, Thursday. So Pennsylvania is going to be close. It's looking better for Biden than for Trump right now, but it is still going to be extremely close.
yeah, I think vacation day now was not really what we were looking for. Like, this is not the moment. And we just have to deal with what we're handed, and that's a reality. Now, let's talk a little bit about the fraud stuff, just because I think people, obviously we're watching, there's lawsuits in Pennsylvania, but there's also that Michigan drop was so controversial. Okay, we go to sleep, and then we think we're up, and then all of a sudden this mass amount of votes, and they feel like they were all magically for Biden. Can you speak to that at all, of whether that could legitimately be fraud, or if it really was just a certain area coming in so overwhelmingly for candidate Biden?
Yeah, so Michigan's actually a great example of the way that the counting behavior works. So Wayne County, Detroit area, again, overwhelmingly for Biden. And that was the bulk of what was left before folks went to bed, and then we woke up and that happened. But coupled with that, then you get reports that people were walking in at 4 a.m. and I can't remember if this is Michigan or it could have been Georgia. Regardless, people were walking in at the 4 a.m. shift change with coolers and luggage, right? Those could legitimately have closed because they knew that they were going to be there for a long time, and coolers for food. But if we're mandated now to go into ballparks with clear bags, can't we just go into our election center with clear bags, right? Why bring in a suitcase and a cooler to cause issues? In places, I think this was in Pennsylvania, they were putting up shields on the window so people couldn't observe. Why do that? Again, if there's nothing to hide, let people watch. They went to court in Pennsylvania to figure out, hey, could poll observers stay in there from the Trump campaign? Why need to go to court for that? Let poll observers be there. Why would there be any concern to have anyone watch if there was nothing to hide? So that's the problem. It could be legitimate. It most likely will end up being legitimate. There's still a lot of court battles happening. Apparently in Nevada, there was some 4,000 votes that were cast by people, or 10,000 votes that were cast by people that didn't live in the state. And I mean, all kinds of weird things. People that apparently were dead that could potentially be voting in other places. There is some fraud happening. There's almost no question about it. How intense is it? There's still a lot of legal room to kind of walk before we really figure all of that out.
I think it is the case that a lot of Americans wish we could all get on board with systemic changes like clear bags, like live stream cameras in the thing, like ensuring that people are within a certain footage when they're observing the ballots, they can get within 6 feet of you actually being able to see something. I mean, I think many parents experience what I experienced the very first time I took my child to register for Little League. We happen to have a really competitive Little League area, and I had to show, I had to have 2 forms of ID, and one of them had to be photo for my kid to play baseball. And people experience this stuff, and they say to themselves, why is it that the vote is less valuable than where my kid plays baseball, or whatever the scenario is in your own life? And so I wish that was a unity item. We're in Virginia. We've experienced, as our liberals took over our legislature, they did in fact weaken election law. We're not used to early voting for any reason. We now early vote, and that was going to be COVID or no COVID. That's the direction that our chamber wanted to go. Away the photo ID requirements. There's a lot of things we're adjusting to that feel like we're taking a step away from improving the integrity of our elections. Instead, we're leaving a lot more room for these frustrations, whether they're legitimate or not, whether they end up being the case or not. I do want to real quick pause because I forgot to remind our folks, our audience, that if they have a question, they should be putting that in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. We would love to take some questions if we get to them at the end, if we have some time. We often get some excellent questions, so feel free to drop your question in the box and we'll take a look and see if we can get to it. I'm going to switch over now to some issues, some policy discussion. Austin, give us your overview of the policy issues that appear to have driven voters to the polls in overwhelming fashion in these states. I mean, the turnout is exceedingly high. What were people passionate about going to vote?
I think that the left played the COVID card exceptionally well. And I'm in Virginia like you are, and I'm in Northern Virginia, and wall-to-wall ads by Warner over the last 4 weeks focusing exclusively on COVID. So they have painted the president as bad on COVID, mishandled COVID, that it's a great danger to all of us. And they said that Gade, they lied about Gade, and Gade said, a mask mandate is tyranny, not masks are tyranny, and that's what Warner accused him of. So I would say that they played the COVID card exceptionally well over this campaign, and you saw that in the debates. You saw that in the advertising that they were running. I guess folks were really concerned about COVID. I mean, but on the other hand, you look at the unemployment rate. It was announced yesterday. Too bad it wasn't announced earlier. Down to 6.9%. Something of a miracle. Thank you, Mr. President. So I think that Trump and his supporters were motivated certainly by the economy, by the life issues. I think played a very important role. There was data that I saw last night. I don't know if this is going to ring true, and that is that Trump won 62% of the Catholic vote, which is unprecedented. I don't know if this will hold. And the key part about that is that it's when they say the Catholic vote, that combines faithful Catholics and what I call generics. That is, people who haven't been to confession or mass in 25 years, who check the Catholic box with a pollster. So if he won 62% of the general Catholic category, that means that a significant portion of Americans were uncomfortable with having an unfaithful Catholic running for president. Very similar to what happened when John Kerry ran. So I think that these are the things that motivated the left, that is to say COVID. I think a significant portion of the right were motivated by the life issues. And, by the record of this president, he has had a remarkable record both domestically and in terms of foreign policy. He had something to run on. Last time he ran on on hopes and trust, and he still managed to win. And this time he had a solid record to run on. And so I think that all told, these are the things that motivated the Trump voter.
So it wasn't just that all the Catholics read your book and went out and voted for Trump. I mean, I assume that's what I looked at the stat, and that was my first thought, was everybody must have read your book. But anyway.
Well, if you want to know why they voted for Trump, then you should read my book, because it's all in there.
Yeah.
He really delivered for the faithful Catholic and the faithful evangelical. In the beginning, we weren't so sure. Now, were we?
No, I was not.
Like a little bit of a leap of faith. I was convinced, and I write about this in my book, that that we voted for him last time on trust on the life issues, but it was mostly because I don't think that he has ever given two hoots about the life issue, either for or against. And
right.
Secondly, he also doesn't care what his betters think of him. Therefore, he would do what the smelly pro-lifers wanted him to do, which is exactly what happened. And he was pro-life, as I say in my book, in a granular way. He was pro-life in ways that people don't even know about. For instance, in negotiations at the United Nations. Nobody knows about that. I do, because I do it every day. But he was pro-life in ways that pro-lifers don't even know about.
Tell us a little bit more about that. So, we think of life as, okay, if you're sort of a base level person that cares about life, you think Supreme Court needs to overturn Roe, then we're going to be good. Okay, those that know a little bit more know that kicks it back to the states. We know some state law gets made around life. We know some federal laws get made around life. But tell us specifically a presidency. What was he able to do with or without? He didn't have the House of Representatives, so it wasn't like he could, sign big laws. What could he accomplish? And allude for us then, if we were to get a Biden presidency, then the flip is what are we going to see on the pro-abortion side? I assume it's sort of the two sides of a coin.
Well, at the Department of Health and Human Services, I mean, he set up an office of conscience protection, which actually had teeth. And Roger Severino, a friend of ours, runs that. And from the time that they made the announcement, and this was conscience protection for medical personnel who do not want to participate or do not want to learn the abortion procedure. They had something like 300 cases within a few weeks of announcing the office. Not many people know about that. In my own work at the United Nations, well, first of all, Republican administrations come in and they will reenact Mexico City policy. For our viewers, Mexico City policy is the policy that says that American money can't go overseas to organizations that perform or promote abortions. It's a limited budget. It's only the family planning budget that is affected. But what did Trump do? He came in and expanded it to the entire foreign health budget. So it goes from a bitty pot to a great big pot. And just last week, we wrote about an announcement they made last Friday at USAID saying that they were going to implement enforcement mechanisms to make sure that foreign organizations or NGOs overseas actually adhere to the policy. People don't. There is defunding the UN Population Fund. Every Republican president does that. Every Democrat president refunds the UN Population Fund, which set up the Chinese one-child policy. But in terms of UN negotiations, he drew a bright line around the phrase reproductive health at the UN. Reproductive health is the phrase that they use to advance a global right to abortion. And he drew a bright line around that and said, we are not going to let that stand in negotiations. Now, nobody knows that. We know that because we do it every day. So he has been pro-life in almost a secret way, in a granular way that most people don't know. On the other hand, Susan B. Anthony List got $52 million to run pro-life ads around the country. So a lot of this stuff got out. He's just been a really remarkable, interesting man in terms of the pro-life issues. On the LGBT question, he's not been that good. And I can cite chapter and verse on that as well. Although he did say, no transgenders in the military, no federal money for transsexual operations in the military. So on some things, he said no to the Equality Act. So in some ways, he's been good on that particular, very controversial issue. But he's been a very interesting politician for those of us who are among social conservatives.
Yeah, and in the symbolic ways, it has felt good to have a president willing to stand with the pro-life community, even as to go as far as the March for Life, and because even we've had previous presidents that gave lip service to life, but really didn't. There was a standoffish. There was it's good, you guys go do your thing, but don't bug me too much. Don't make me talk about it too much. We've had in Virginia governors that did the right thing on life, but never would have a big public bill signing. I mean, but then we get the pro-abortion governor and they go to Planned Parenthood to sign the repeal of all our pro-life laws. So it's, the symbolic things are only symbolic, but they do feel good. And I think a lot of folks connect to that when they see a president saying, I believe it, I'm doing things on it, and I'm willing to actually own it.
This is because he has not cared what his betters think of him. And so he's willing to stand with smelly people like us, the pro-life and pro-family people. And it's like, you look at George Bush, I mean, he did a lot of right things, but again, arm's distance, for the most part. And plus Bush surrounded himself with people who were against us. This man put a faithful, let me talk for 1 second about Andrew Bremberg. You know Andrew Bremberg's name?
I know his name, but our audience probably doesn't.
He was the head of the Domestic Policy Council in the White House. He went to Catholic undergraduate school in Florida called Ave Maria University. He went to the Catholic University Law School in Washington, D.C., a movement pro-lifer who did ads with Human Life International. He and his wife, very pro-life. When he was up to be U.S. ambassador to the UN in Geneva, he was asked something. He had helped, and this is one of these secret things that Trump did. There was a resolution at the Security Council which would have incorporated reproductive health for the very first time in a Security Council resolution on humanitarian assistance. This would have been an utter disaster. Bremberg and his lieutenant, Katie Talento, faithful Catholic, has written columns against contraception, came under great attack for that. They scuttled this resolution at the Security Council. So he was asked about this at his confirmation hearing by Menendez of New Jersey. And Bremberg said this, and I've never heard something quite so strong from somebody in that chair. He said, I do not believe that abortion is the answer to any moral question. And it was such a shocking answer that Jean Shaheen accused him of deflecting. He was like, what? Why are you avoiding the question? That's how direct, and so this is a measure of the type of people that Trump surrounded himself with. Andrew Bremberg, Katie Talento in the White House, Roger Severino at HHS. The number 2 guy at HHS is Eric Hargan, faithful daily mass going Catholic who's pro-life as the day is long. So throughout the federal administration were personnel people who were carrying the pro-life cause.
Absolutely. I could name after name that I was so thrilled, got positions in the White House, and just I knew their influence would be significant for the things that matter to us. So, I mean, this is clearly one of the things that his supporters love about him. He's willing to do the hard things because he's not worried about what people think. Tell me a little bit more about what is it between President Trump and his supporters. What is that loyalty thing that we're seeing, that amazing support, those big rallies? What do you chalk all that up to? And of course, we're bummed if it doesn't translate into a victory in this next week or so.
He has a remarkable connection with his supporters. You go to one of his rallies, which in 2016, Kathy and I tried to go to his rally in Ashburn, not far from where we live. And it was a noontime rally, and we thought, we'll head over there about 11:15. And of course, we got there, and there were like 5,000 people in line. So there's just no way we're going to go in. So you watch one of his rallies on television. He has them in the palm of his hand for an hour and a half, and they're laughing their heads off. And that was the column that I wrote in Crisis recently about Trump and his sense of humor. He's a Jewish comedian from New York City. He is in line with Woody Allen and Neil Simon and Danny Simon and Mel Brooks and that whole Catskill crew of Jewish comedians. And so much of what he gets in trouble for is he's doing bits. He's riffing. Russia, if you're listening, I hope you come up with 30,000 emails. He was riffing, and the left takes that and they run with it. But we understand that he's being hilarious. And that's one of the things that's one of the remarkable connections between Trump and his fans, is that it's like being at a concert when you go to one of his rallies. So it's a very personal connection. And I get the sense that he deeply cares about me and
Mm,
my children. And he would point to Biden during the debate, and Biden was talking about, oh, you're sitting around the kitchen table talking about your bills or whatever, and Trump goes, you're being a regular politician. That is not the way that I'm not a regular politician. I don't
mm.
speak that way because it's as phony as a $3 bill. So Trump has a very strong personal connection with his supporters. I mean, it's why we jumped in our car and did that Trump train around the Beltway last Sunday.
Mm,
It was
mhm.
wonderful and hilarious, and it was really remarkable. Trump train, as far as the eye could see, in front and behind you. Why didn't this turn into a victory? I don't know. I don't know. I wish I knew. Maybe it still will.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to explain to my kids that what they saw with these Trump rallies and we passed locally big Trump rallies that were just organic on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I was trying to explain to my kids, this is not normal. I did not see this with Romney. I did not see this with McCain. This is not like a normal Republican behavior to just be so excited about the candidate, that they're actually out on the streets. And so my kids, I think, are in this weird moment, anybody's kids right now, trying to interpret what's going on in this country. They have no frame of reference because either weren't born when other stuff happened or they can't, kind of make heads or tails. So you're trying to help them sort of work through it, and you kind of go, no, this isn't actually normal. I wish it were that we were usually this, excited about our team, so to speak, whoever's running. Let me ask both of you. Okay, so just as we think about this whole situation we're in, does the media, through the media, I guess, do they, or the big tech, I think is another one we should talk about, because Facebook, Twitter, all the censorship that we're battling against, where things, did they learn anything after this moment that we're in, where clearly the credibility factor is shattered on the media side? And I would argue it bleeds over into everybody's trying to tell me a narrative. We had half the country rebel against this narrative that we were being shoved down our throats. So that's one positive thing I would take out of this is America's not ready to be, bullied into submission, which is, thank heavens. But is there a lesson that we think media or big tech could possibly get any better out of this after this moment? Either one of you or both.
I don't have much hope that they will learn their lesson, because in a scenario, especially where President Trump wins, they will view that as vindication for them. They will view it as they were right and a whole chunk of the country was wrong. And they're not going to be able to decipher, because look, bluntly, if they didn't learn their lessons over these last 4 years, I don't see how they learn their lessons today. Now, big tech may be forced to learn a lesson if we legislate things and parameters around them, but as their credibility continues to wane, they're going to have to kind of look inward and almost coalesce around and maybe even double down on their claims, because they're going to feel like if they admit that their credibility shot, most likely it's going to tank their ability, I think, to largely stay afloat. So I hate to sound pessimistic. Hopefully Austin maybe has a more optimistic scenario or outlook, but I don't have much hope that they learn their lesson. And if anything, I think it's going to get a bit worse in these 4 years of a Biden presidency potentially.
I published a book 3 years ago called Fake Science, and I went through all of these issues where they make scientific claims about the family, about children, about homosexuality, about fracking, about poverty. And what I concluded in researching and writing that book is I don't believe anything anybody who has the label expert says, and I hate that. There is no authority that I recognize today that would be considered mainstream. I just don't. And when you look at the media, it's even worse. Jake Tapper cutting into the president's remarks in the White House yesterday, calling him a liar. I am utterly divorced from the academy, from the media, from Hollywood. I'm utterly divorced from them, and find my information in other ways. to answer your question, are they going to have learned any lessons from this? Absolutely not. They are just going to double down, and you know, and I fear that even Fox News is going to go that way. I mean, Kathy and I settled down to watch the returns the other night, and with 1% of the vote reporting in Virginia, they called it for Biden, and we turned the television off. It was so disheartening. So I don't think that they will have learned any lessons. I think that big tech is going to get even more aggressive. You'll see today that Twitter has blocked a number of tweets from the president making accusations of voter fraud, although they're leaving other hideous things up, like the comedian holding up. Somebody sent out a meme about that Kathy, what's her name, the comedian holding the bloody head of Trump is still up. So I think that big tech is going to double down, and I honestly think that they're going to really come after us as best as they possibly can. And that's one of the messages in my book, No Finer Time to Be a Faithful Catholic, that's coming out in February, is we are coming into a very aggressive time of persecution. I argue in the book that there is now an official state religion, and it is not ours. You know, and that they are coming after heretics, which is us. I also claim, because I'm a Pollyanna, that this is really quite wonderful that God sent us here right now to fight this desperate fight. And that's my message to everybody that I talk to. You know, God knows what he's about. You know, I mean, he sent the likes of us. How remarkable is that? I mean, but then he picked the apostles too, and they weren't the A team. So, you know, it's like, because he wants all the credit. That's my little joke. So yeah, I don't. The establishment is coming for us. How wonderful is that?
Well, I'm guessing that I know your answer to the next question then, but you know, the Democrats are powwowing. They thought they were going to sweep the nation. They thought this was going to be a blue wave that captured the Senate, picked up more in the House, and that may not be what happened. And it looks like, in fact, that it's not. I think we may hold the Senate and see that we still have a conservative majority there. We can block the court packing. We can block some other things that are planned. Looks like the House may have actually gone the other direction a little ways. We certainly got a lot of pro-life women that are now in office, which is fantastic. So, but we saw this, if you watched the news yesterday, the Democrats had a House caucus call, and it was actually the race that we care about the most that really made news. So Abigail Spanberger, Congresswoman for the 7th, whose race is not actually technically called yet, but she has declared herself a victor. But she got on there and she was pretty mad because the positions of the left are harmful in a centrist kind of district. She basically criticized the anti-police rhetoric, the use of socialism. She had some expletives I won't repeat, but she was mad. And so the question is, it looked like Nancy Pelosi shut her down, said, no, we had a good night and we're moving on. Is that what we should expect? Or will there be more other folks that say we're going to lose more seats in 22 if we don't act together?
I don't know. I'll just say just a couple quick words. I mean, we're still on pace right now. Republicans are up in a number of congressional seats in New York, a number of congressional seats in California. There's still a lot of runway to go. It's looking very likely that we're going to gain 10 plus seats, which they thought that we were going to lose 6 or 7 seats. So that is a complete reversal in a year that, again, we saw the president. I don't know that it's ever happened where the incumbent president loses and his own party gains seats. Look, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has to go on Twitter to defend progressives and progressives in districts and the entire kind of narrative, that's when you know that the narrative is in trouble. I have been saying this, again, regardless of the outcome of the election relative to President Trump, and it is going to hurt and it will be harmful to our issues, no doubt about it, for 4 years. But what happened on election night was much more so a pushback on him personally than it was on our issues. Our issues actually won the day, and the type of voter that cobbles together a coalition of social sort of conservative values, family values, and a different economic outlook, more maybe economic nationalism or economics that kind of pushes back on big corporation but embraces sort of the little guy, the working class. That is the party of the future, and there's a lot of Republican leaders ready to take that mantle. So I actually think it's a good night for our values. It just was not a good night in the sense of a President Trump victory, but it was definitely a bad night for what the Democrats wanted to see. I mean, Nancy Pelosi will probably still end up being speaker, but man, she's going to govern over a much tighter majority, And I don't know how she can claim that she has the unequivocal mandate that she is, again, wanting to have. Again, it's going to be a part of the media narrative that they're going to try to sell.
You know, my little brother is a captain in the fire department in St. Louis County, Missouri, and I've been trying to convince him for the longest time that the Democratic Party is not what the Democratic Party used to be when I was a Democrat in high school and college, and that the party of the working man is the Republican Party. And increasingly, I don't like this phrase, people of color. It is remarkable. I mean, Trump might have lost, but he was not defeated. And that's the message that we come away with, because we are going to hold the Senate. And I have heard that is there a remote possibility that we could take the House, George? Larry O'Connor was saying that yesterday on WMAL, that there are so many seats where we are leading that we could come close to flipping the House. So, I mean, very clearly, this was a repudiation of the left and an underscoring of what I hope and think is a new Republican Party. I'm a silver lining kind of a guy, and I think there were loads of silver linings through this process.
Well, I think the silver lining kind of guy, and hearing you say this is kind of the new party, maybe for us Virginians, tell us how, is there hope for our poor deep blue state that, continues to look that way? We've got a governor race next year. Is there hope, and what kind of a candidate would that need to be? Because we do get the sense that Trump has remade the Republican brand a bit, and that we've gained in the Latino community and the African American community. So what does that look like if you're trying to put up the right kind of candidate to go against liberalism in Virginia?
Boy, that's a tough one, because I live in Northern Virginia, and it's like my wife just worked her keister off. She was the chairman of our local district, and she worked so hard to see just an overwhelming number of votes for Biden here in Northern Virginia. So Northern Virginia is tough. I do not have an answer. I kind of think that Gade ought to consider running for governor, because now he's got some major name recognition. He's got an amazing story, as you said earlier. He's not going to be running against an incumbent. But winning the state house of Virginia is only part of it. Taking back the legislature is an even bigger part of it, and I think you know more about that than I do. But yeah, it's a little frustrating. In my home state of Virginia is consistently on those maps. There's New York blue, California blue, Virginia blue. It's like always, and it's a little embarrassing. I used to tell people it was a pleasure to wake up in a state where the news out of the state legislature was generally good every morning when you got up. Not so true anymore. I mean, I spent many years in New York City where it's just, you couldn't even read about it. So I don't have any answers for Virginia, except, move the federal government elsewhere.
Yes, we want virtual federal government from your bedroom somewhere else, not in Northern Virginia and Maryland. That would definitely, or all in Maryland. You can just all move above the line, and we'll just have one good state and one not so good. I'm fine with that. We got a couple questions from our audience. They're a little bit granular. They're a little bit more detailed, but I guess maybe George, you might be the one to answer. There is a question about the Senate races in Georgia and the prospects for at least one Republican victory. I don't know how closely you follow this, and it moves every hour. Do you have anything you want to share with us on that you've seen?
Yeah, so in Georgia right now, we are expecting two runoffs, actually. We're expecting the runoff that we had always expected, the Loeffler one, and we're expecting a Perdue runoff, because that margin needed to stay above 50%. And right now, Senator Perdue is at 49.8%. So he's going to potentially miss the runoff by 0.2%. Now, if the expected military ballots come in and it does look like the margin is tightened there in favor of President Trump on Biden, there is a potential for that to not be the case. Those runoffs go to January. I'll tell you, there are some people predicting a $500 million race or the $500 million spend for both of those races. I would not be surprised, because if what's standing between us and court packing us and essentially unfettered access to appointments and everything, and the trifecta is the state of Georgia, every amount of Republican conservative money is going to be pouring into Georgia. Now the left is going to be trying to do the same. The silver lining and positive thing I have here is I feel a state like Georgia is much less likely to be the ones to award the trifecta to the left. And even if they wanted to push back against President Trump and what we're talking about now about the issue still mattering, I cannot imagine that they're going to give it to, I don't think they're going to give it all to Biden. So if Biden's in the White House, they're going to probably want a foil to that and still keep the Senate in Republican hands. So both of those, though, do look to go to a runoff at this point.
I mean, just look at the good news about how much money the left spent to try and pick off Lindsey Graham. What did they spend? $100 million. There was another Senate race where they spent $100 million. Who was that? Where they lost?
McConnell, maybe?
Mitch McConnell. They spent $100 million against Mitch. And Bloomberg spent $100 million in Florida. You know, these guys, they're going to spend boatloads of cash, and I think we can still win.
All right, we have a question. Since it's possible to check whether your vote has been counted at the website, you know, there's that's in Virginia. I don't know if that's everywhere. We're finding friends who have voted conservatively are not being counted, while liberal votes made at the same time are being counted. So they're seeing some discrepancy. Is there someplace people who are discovering their votes are not being counted and report this? I don't know of any. This is probably a Virginia specific question. I assume, anybody know anything about that? And maybe we need to look that up and circle back with the questioner. Anybody?
I think the Trump campaign is setting up an ability to be able to put those complaints in. Now, I don't know if it's specific to Virginia. They most likely are working on the states that haven't been called yet and fielding this first. I know in Arizona, places where we have Republican attorney generals, our attorney general out here has been working, him and his staff have been working diligently because they've gotten hundreds, if not thousands, of complaints about discrepancies and Sharpie usage and all kinds of stuff. But unfortunately, in a state like Virginia, you don't have a ready-made way internally to do that because a lot of those would be dismissed. But the Trump campaign is fielding those. I just don't know that they're going to place a high priority on the ones, unfortunately, coming from Virginia at this point.
And we'll just check in a little more to that. And if we get an answer, we'll circle back with you, the questioner, on that. Here's one for either of you. Have either of you heard about the hammer and scorecard cyber warfare stuff? I just heard it for the first time yesterday, and I just didn't know if it's a much grander plan of fraud. And, you know, these are the kind of things that can be you know, so far-fetched they're unbelievable, and then you find out there could be something true there. And sometimes they're just conspiracy theories that circulate in the web, and we kind of don't know what to do with them. So anybody hear anything? Nothing? Okay.
I've never heard of it.
We'll leave that one until we learn more. But you know, hopefully, if it's not anything real, it dissipates like the rest of these. That is the challenge that we live in today, and that's why people struggle to know what authority to trust, is because there's so much out there.
I've never heard of it, but I believe it.
There you go. I think what I'll do is kind of end on this note. We have one question that I think is really a good place to end, which is, you know, the person says, can Ms. Cobb talk about how she keeps going when all the work we did in Virginia didn't end up, you know, is not yet resolved, but may not go the way. How do you get up the next day, do it again, especially if the process is not fair? So maybe this is a good note to end on. I've certainly talked to people since the election that feel very defeated, either locally with something that happened here in Virginia, or just looking at the map and not feeling like it's going to come out how we wanted, and sort of in your gut going, how do we square these gigantic rallies with not being able to pull off the final win? And as we mentioned, that feeling of, is the system working? You know, so of course, everybody, you know, this for us, honestly, because we do state level work, I had to work through this a lot last year because we lost so much in Virginia last year. So I find myself again, yes, incredibly disappointed. Our team at the Family Foundation Action has never done more ground game than we did this time. We've never knocked on more doors. We've never texted more people. We've never made more phone calls. And so it is hard, and particularly because we have a race in front of us this year. Virginia always has an election. You never get a year off. And the next year is, for us, what we feel is incredibly important. We need to change out our governor so we have at least a backstop for bad ideas. We at least need a veto pen. And so, yeah, you wake up. What I try to work through is, I think it is fully human to grieve when you are sad about things. I don't think it is actually very healthy to just sort of, okay, well, God's called us to be faithful, so we don't emotion it at all. But I think you give yourself a window. You give yourself a window that says, I'm disappointed in how this came out. But then you circle back to the bedrocks, to the principles and scripture that we know, which is God is on his throne. We don't get to see the whole, we see this tiny piece of a puzzle. We think we see it all. We humor ourselves to think that we have the big picture and we know what's best. And that's an unfortunate thing about human beings, that we put ourselves as God in the center of the universe, and we look out and we think, I know how it should be. And that is not always how God sees it. And in fact, I know that is not how God sees it. So we work through our disappointments, and then we circle back to our theology, and we say, at the end of the day, there are amazing things that God does to reveal his glory, even in the darkest moments. And so we might get to be in a dark moment. That is some people's fate in history, is to be in tough moments. And that we are not so privileged to think we get to have life easy. Scripture doesn't say that. It never ever says, hey, just follow Jesus, it'll all be smooth sailing. That's not what we believe. And so we just simply need to fall back, and it's really a matter of how deep does your faith go, how much do you trust? And that's, when I start to overemphasize politics or be disappointed beyond a reasonable amount with regard to the outcome of something, I have to ask myself, do I think that it depends on me? And do I really trust God? You go back to, am I overinflating my own role and underinflating the God of the universe? And when you get those things square and you spend some time in prayer, you get back up the next day, because it's not as simple as, okay, well, I didn't get the outcome, so I stop. It is, we get back up the next day. We're still called to be faithful. We still know that human flourishing happens when godly principles are given through government that is following the creator of the universe told us how it's all supposed to work. Whether it's human beings, whether it's the church, the government, he mapped it out for us, and we know that is how all humans, whether you believe that or not, actually enjoy the greatest outcome. So if we believe that, we get back up the next day and we keep working in that direction, and that's what we're called to do. So I have a question. I think it is important that we all sort of think through this stuff, and we're human. We have to work through it probably many times, and this may be one of those elections where we have to work through it. Any parting words, George, Austin? You have been phenomenal. We've enjoyed so much being able to chat with you. Any parting thoughts?
Well, this is kind of my sweet spot. When we look about generations that we admire and that we kind of wish we could have been with, what is it, the second century Christians, the men and women who were in the Second World War, the men and women who were in the Revolutionary War. I think that future generations will look back upon ours with great envy, that they could not be here with us right now when everything seems so lost. It's like that as St. Joan of Arc, as there's a T-shirt that my daughter wears with St. Joan of Arc, and she said, and it says, "I was born for this." We were born for this. We're born for union with God in heaven, but on this earth we were made for fighting. So I honestly think that future generations are going to go, golly, I wish I could have been there now when such evil was upon the earth, and I could have been with those brave men and women who fought and lost and never gave up.
Wow, good stuff. Any parting words, George?
Just that, yes, there are absolutely moments to grieve. That is healthy, but sort of in a similar vein as Austin, it's just our work is too important. And in the grand scheme of people that have been in more difficult times, my family comes from the Middle East. I grew up hearing about what my parents had to go through, what my dad went through. And, I come from a lineage of people that perseveres, and we just need to persevere. We need to push through. We need to keep fighting. The work is too important. And we'll take a little bit of a break, and we're already talking about 2022 in Arizona from a political perspective. And if your calling is politics, then it's politics. If your calling is to help by prayer, it's by prayer. Whatever your calling is, persevere, fight, and push through, because the work is too important.
Wow. Well, thank you guys, and Georgia, wish you luck as you continue to work through. I know you're in the heat of it, in the details, and making appearances in the media. We got to see him on Fox News last night, and so we wish you well as you continue through this next couple of moments in the election. And to our audience, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you've enjoyed this extra opportunity to see everyone. Have a great day.